Climbing Gold is a production of Duct Tape and Beer, with support from the North Face. Never stop exploring. Dr. Squatch, get dirty, stay clean. Koros, explore perfection. Element, restoring health through hydration. And Aeropress, the better coffee press.
Hey everyone, we're gonna go get into it. This is our Olympic preview. If you're one of those people out there that thinks comp climbing isn't climbing, I'd say stay with us. This is like any sport. You need to know the athletes, the characters, the backstories for it to have deeper meaning. In the greater world of climbing, we have our legends, the stone masters, the innovators, the alpinists.
And right now in this chapter of climbing, we're witnessing some new legends emerge. The next generation, Lynn Hills and Chris Sharmas, the people from the past. So if you're interested in how the sport's going to evolve, you should definitely be interested in what is happening in Paris this summer.
Yeah. We've got our executive producer, Lizzie Hendricks, and producer and journalist John Bergman joining us. So, all right, first things first, when are the Olympics and how do we watch them? Because those are important.
Yeah, so the Olympics technically start on July 26th, but climbing doesn't start until August 5th. Climbing is in the second week of the Olympics. So climbing runs from August 5th until August 8th, the women's final being one of the last events of the Olympic Games.
Where do we watch it? Because I kind of remember that being a nightmare last time in Tokyo.
Yeah, so you can watch it on NBC, but that'll be heavily edited and sort of packaged. So if you want to watch it the way you'd watch a normal comp, you should stream it on the Peacock app, which would kind of give you the same experience you would have from streaming a World Cup.
Yeah. There's been a huge shift in the format for the better. John, what has changed?
Yeah, so it is still a combined format in a sense, just like it was in Tokyo. But I think the big thing that has changed, there are kind of two aspects. What is actually being combined has changed, and also how the winner is determined has changed. So if we remember back to the Tokyo Olympics, the combined events were speed, bouldering, and lead in that order. And the winner was determined by a pretty convoluted multiplication system of rank in each event. So just to give an example, if you think back at Tokyo, if somebody got, let's say, first place in, let's just make it easy. They get first place in speed climbing, then they get second place in bouldering. So they got first and second, 1 and a 2, and then they get third place in lead climbing. So they got first, second, and third. To get their final score, it would be 1 times 2, which is 2, times 3 is 6. So their final score, which is also kind of their final rank, is 6. And then it's whoever had the lowest rank wins. And it did work. Like I said, it was convoluted, but we did get winners in Alberto Hines Lopez in the men's division and Yan Garnet in the women's division.
I think the big thing to keep in mind for Paris this summer is that climbing now has 4 medals allotted to it as opposed to 2 medals. In Tokyo, everything had to be combined because there was only 1 medal for men, 1 medal for women. Now they're 2 medal for men, 2 medal for women, and so we've been able to parse out separate the speed climbing out, and so now it's just a combined format of lead and bouldering together and speed climbing separately. And presumably in LA in 2028, the next Olympics, most likely there'll be 3 sets of medals, and so it'll be back to a standard World Cup format. I think, for all the criticism with the scoring formats and then the whatever, it's like people just have to keep in mind that the Olympics only have so many medals to give out. They only give so many to new sports. And so climbing has basically done the best that it can with what it was given. And so this year it's doing it in a better format, and presumably in LA it'll do something even more similar to what we're used to in the World Cup circuit.
And Alex, how many people are actually competing for each medal?
Yeah, so there are 40 climbers in the combined format, 20 men, 20 women in the combined lead and bouldering discipline, and then there are 28 speed climbers, 14 men, 14 women. So, almost 70 climbers total. Basically the best climbers in the world. I mean, the nice thing about the format this year is that you really get to see everybody excel in their own disciplines. So it really is, 70 of the best climbers in the world.
It seems like the qualification process has been pretty long. When did it start and what did it take to qualify this year?
Yeah, John, maybe correct me if I'm wrong with some of this because the qualification process has been convoluted and I don't even totally understand it. But so it started with World Championships where a few people just automatically qualified. Then there were the Continental Championships like the Pan Ams and that's where several of the Americans qualified. And then most recently, there's been the OQS, the Olympic Qualifying Series, which have been two different competitions set on opposite sides of the world, which is crazy. They're brutal 4-day comps that wrapped up at the end of June. And so that is what determined the remainder of the competitors. Basically, that filled the remainder of the slots for the Olympics. So many of the Olympians have just been selected in the last few weeks.
Let's break down both the men and women's boulder and lead category. Talk to us about that.
Well, I guess big picture is that I think there's a lot of talent in the field this year. We have both the best competitors in the world, but also many, most of the best outdoor climbers in the world as well. And so I think, it's a really fair point that it's the best climbers in the world. Like we're really seeing everybody on display this year. Like all the biggest names that you expect to see, we're seeing.
One thing that I don't like in sports is when there's like one dominant person and the announcer continually just talks about how that person's going to win and no one else has a chance. But I kind of think that there might be one dominant competitor on the women's side. And I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Yan Garnet won gold already. She has the most World Cup victories of any climber of all time, men or women. She just won her 20th World Cup title in Innsbruck. So, if she didn't win, it would be surprising. But there's always a chance that she could lose, maybe.
I think the interesting thing, too, about Yanya, real quick, before we get into the other competitors, is she has all the accolades that you mentioned. She's the defending Olympic champion. But since the Tokyo Olympics, I think she's been very smart in how she's handled her career and her celebrity. It's something that's kind of hard for, maybe Alex, you probably can relate to how she has smartly handled this more so than Lisa or Fitz or I can. But so after the Olympics in 2021, she took almost all of the 2022 boulder season off. And after that, she was pretty limited in the 2023 season as well, in the Boulder World Cup circuit and the Lead World Cup circuit. She didn't do a lot of events. And even this year, she's really been choosy about which competitions she takes part in. I think, and some of that was due to she did have an injury. But she's been open in saying that some of it was due to she just needed time to recharge after the Olympics and kind of like decompress a little bit. So I think to go along with all the accolades, it seems to me like she's been very smart about the lead up to these games and kind of the preparation for it from a pressure standpoint, because everybody's like saying it's like we're saying she's the favorite. It'd be a shock if she didn't win, and that's all true. But you put yourself in her shoes and you're just thinking like, gosh, how must that feel to be her and to have everybody expecting her to win?
Yeah, so do you think she's been really strategic about how she's sort of marshaled her energy, sort of like saved up her spirit, like getting psyched the last couple of years? It does seem like she's been less on the circuit than she used to be, but maybe that's because she also has less to prove. In her first seasons, she's like trying to win a world championship. She's trying to win the bouldering title and things like that. And now she's literally won everything. Like, does she care? Does she need to like fly to China every other weekend to do some comp? Like when she knows she's going to win, I don't know. I could see her just like not caring quite as much.
Yeah. And it's done wonders for her star power too, right? And probably unintentionally. I don't think that was any part of her plan, but it has become this thing where since she has been fairly limited in her participation at World Cups, when she is on the roster at a World Cup, it's like
people are psyched.
Yeah, that is the story. It's like, wow, Yanya is here. Yanya is going to be at this World Cup, and it just kind of gives it this extra magnitude that's been really fun to see. It's like
it's like a celebrity appearance, except that a celebrity who always wins. Just it comes and bone crushes all the final problems.
Yeah, the last World Cup that she was in Innsbruck a couple weeks ago, which was like her Olympic tune-up. It was watching that, it was almost like you saw the set. It almost seemed like the setters had set like a nice warm up for her. And it was like nails difficult. And then Yanni would come out and she'd almost come out like too hot and like overswing some jump problem. And then it would just be like focus in. And it just looked like she was climbing V3 or V4 out of the gate. It was.
Yeah, she had to like rein it in a bit. She was like, wait. This isn't nearly as hard as my training problems. I better like rein it in a little bit here.
She had to rein it in a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
I know, yeah. I don't need to jump 40 feet across the wall right now.
Yeah, she had to turn all the dials down a little bit. She's like, whoa, turns out no one else has been training as hard as I have.
Yeah, okay, so going back, Lisa, you had asked if there's anybody that can beat her. I mean, of course, right? It's sports. Anything can happen. I think if you look at it historically, there are a few names that come to mind because they are people that have beaten her in the past on the World Cup circuit. Through the American lens, Natalia Grossman famously beat Yan Garnet at a bouldering World Cup in Salt Lake City in 2021, which was kind of, in some ways, the event that kind of announced Natalia Grossman to the world as a real leader on the World Cup scene. The next year, 2020...
Though also, it's kind of a credit to Yanya's dominance that we go back to 2021 for one person who beat her at one event. And you're kind of like, that doesn't really scream weakness on Yanya's part. You know, you're sort of like, 3 years ago she got second at one event. You're like, okay, well that's, I think she's still got a pretty good shot.
Yeah, if you want to have some fun, look at Yan Garnet's IFSC profile page where it lists all of her places in all the comps dating back to her rookie season, 2015. And ever since like 2019 or something, right? It's just like first. And then every once in a while it's like second, first. And then sometimes there's like 15th because it's like speed climbing, right? In the lead up to Tokyo. But everything, it's like, it's very rare. Anything that's not first place, it's few and far between. But in 2022, in the lead World Cup circuit, Ai Mori from Japan famously swooped in. She hadn't been on the circuit that year. And then near the tail end of the circuit, Ai Mori swoops in, beats Yan Garnet twice in lead, and then leaves the circuit. Doesn't do it again. So everybody's kind of standing around like, what in the world? Like, who is this Ai Mori? Like, she just beat Yanya and then said peace. So Ai Mori has beaten Yanya before. Oriane Bertone of France beat Yanya in a World Cup in Prague in last year, 2023. I don't know how much stock I would put in that victory because that was Yanya's return after being on a hiatus for a while, and Yanya still got second place. But more recently, Ai Mori then at the World Championships beat Yanya again in lead. So
So what we're saying is that if we make like an Avenger style team up of all the other best women in the world, they might be able to beat Yanya if she's having an off day.
Well, that's the thing.
It'll be like a what is it, like Power Rangers or one of the things where they all transform together. Like if you take the best attributes of all these other different women who have qualified for the Olympics, then like they might be able to beat Yanya.
So what about the men's? What should people be thinking about on that side?
Well, I think the men's field is a little more, sort of normal in a way. I mean, it's like the names that you have come to expect from both outdoor climbing and competition climbing, people like Adam Ondra, Jakob Schubert, Tomoe Narasaki, Alex Megos, each of whom have done some of the hardest things outside and also been fixtures on a competition scene for, a decade or more. Like, I don't even know. Also, each of whom went to the last Olympics and had varying degrees of success, but at least competed in Tokyo already. And then we have sort of the young up-and-comers, a bunch of younger competitors. I don't know, John, who do you think is a favorite in the men's field?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. You said it's like more normal, which is so true. But like, the abnormality is to have someone like Yanya, who is a favorite. If you look historically at like World Cups and World Championships, it's not normal to have such a dominant competitor like that. And I think to think about a favorite in the men's field, it's almost just like... It's sort of like, which path do you want to go down to choose a favorite? Because you could look at somebody like Alberto Hines Lopez,
who's won gold already, so he's halfway there.
He has won gold already, and in the lead up to the Tokyo Olympics, he was one of the few competitors who did like a full World Cup circuit. He was doing so many World Cups in the lead up to Tokyo, and everybody thought he was nuts for doing that. They're like, he's going to be burned out, he's going to be overtrained, and then he gets the last laugh because he ends up getting the Olympic gold medal. Since then, he hasn't really lit the World Cup circuit on fire, right? Like he's had some injuries, unfortunately, but it's been pretty quiet from him. And then all of a sudden in the OQS, the Olympic qualifying series that just wrapped up, he comes to life again. And you're like, oh, wow, he's looking fantastic. He could maybe win again. So because of how he seems to just, I don't know, peak at the perfect time, you could see him as a favorite.
Though this raises an interesting point that it's hard to judge the competitors' varying levels of fitness throughout the season because you never really know, because of the complicated qualification process. Some of the people qualified a long time ago, so they've been like deep in some random training block and they've only been showing up at competitions just to sort of tune up on comp problems. But I think it's hard to judge where anybody stands fitness-wise just because you don't really know where they are on their own personal cycle, basically. And so I don't know. I mean, it's been interesting because at some of the World Cups, you're like, oh, that person doesn't seem as strong as they maybe normally would be. But you're also like, well, they might just be going there literally for practice. Like they're not trying to win. They're not peaking for the event. They're not trying the way they might. Obviously, they're trying their hardest, but they're just not in the position to give it 100% in that moment. So I think in Paris, presumably they all will have rested and sort of, like hopefully we'll be seeing the absolute best out of everybody in Paris. And it'll be interesting to see where they are then.
Do you think this is also potentially, like in the men's field, it feels like a changing of the guard? There are a bunch of the young climbers, Alberto, Colin Duffy, Serrato from Japan, Toby Roberts. And then I think that, even talking with Adam Ondra earlier this year, his psyche didn't seem as strong. Do you think that this is like kind of maybe this Olympics, we end up sort of saying goodbye to some of the people like Jakob or Tomoa or Ondra just because they're starting to age out of competition?
I mean, I think for sure. I think a bunch of them, especially the names you just mentioned who went to Tokyo and are now going again to Paris, I would be shocked if they try to stay in peak form for 4 more years to make it to LA again. So it's like, yeah, maybe they would do some more comps, maybe they'll do some World Cups. But I just, and I think especially because a lot of them enjoy climbing outdoors a lot. And somebody like Adam Ondra, he's got a kid, he's got a family, he's got a business, and like he's got things going on. I'm kind of like, it's just hard for me to imagine him wanting to train indoors that much to stay in the comp circuit. Especially because he sees the writing on the wall too, where it's all like 16-year-old Japanese kids who are beating him on the World Cup scene. And he's, mid 30s or I don't know, maybe low 30s. But basically, as soon as you have a kid and like you own a gym and things like that, it's hard to compete with 16-year-olds,
I think there are two avenues here. There's certainly the age, you mentioned like the 16-year-olds coming up. There's the age aspect where you have Ondra, who's 31, I think, and you have Jakob, who's 33.
And Alex Negos is also
30, yeah. And which like, it's still very young, but in the comp scene, like if you're over 30, you're like sort of on the other end of your career.
Which isn't unusual. That's the same as gymnastics. That's the same as almost every other sport. So, we got to remember that climbing is basically totally in line with every other sport.
Yeah, and aside from the ages, if you just look at accolades, especially for like Adam Ondra and Jakob Schubert, they have so many World Cup victories. They have world championships. And competitively, if you just look at kind of historically, the Olympics is such a perfect bookend for a career, for an athlete in any sport. I think you have to probably think that, I think Jakob seems to still really love competing by all accounts, but you do have...
That's because he still wins so much. It's easy to love it when you still win. You're like, surprise, I'm still winning.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like they've kind of done it all. How long do they want to continue to do it and maybe continue to do it until their results dip a little bit, which inevitably will happen, whether it's soon or far away. That happens to every competitor. It's like, are they just going to want to hang around on the circuit after they've been in a couple Olympics and after they've won world championships and won World Cup? Yeah, they might. Yeah, they'll probably want to move on. So
I think the Tokyo Olympics, it was funny seeing Jakob get his bronze, get his third, because he seemed genuinely delighted and surprised and just totally and to win a bronze in sort of remarkable fashion, like him coming out and dominating on the lead route and his specialty and sort of coming from a low position to a podium. It's like in a way like that would bookend a competition career. And so it's interesting to see him here at the Paris Olympics basically trying to do better than last time. When I don't know, because that was one of the highlights of the Tokyo Olympics to me, was seeing Jakob just so delighted with his bronze. He was like, I can't believe I did it.
I think speed was such an X factor in that combined discipline that like you had to be surprised no matter what happened if you did well, just because especially for someone like Jakob, who's not at all a speed specialist and was only doing speed because he was forced to as part of that discipline, that 3-event combined discipline. Yeah, I'd be shocked too. It's like, wow, I made it through the gauntlet of this crazy speed inclusion, and it got a medal out of it.
One of the things that came up in talking with several of the competitors this year that'll be at the Olympics is the setting, and the truth of it is like how it has evolved so rapidly, even from Tokyo, on that sense. It seems that the lead has stabilized. It's like a little more predictable about who's probably going to be in the top 5. Obviously, there's someone always can slip or whatever, but the bouldering really, it can be quite random. Will you guys talk about the setting? Like, where are we at with that? It does seem like on a level it's stabilized a bit, but yeah, talk to me about that.
I don't know if we should use the word random so much as varied, because I think random implies that it's random, it's just pure chance. But I think varied is, and I know this is totally semantics, like splitting hairs here, but I think varied sort of implies that depending on what gets set on a given day, people's skill sets will vary, basically. I don't know. Because I don't, it's not just like pure chance. It's like, because obviously the better competitors still do better. Like Yanya still wins every comp. Like she's, basically. And so, like, I think when people complain about setting being random, you're like, well, it's not random because the best people still do really well. But there's a lot of variability to it in that it can highlight different strengths and weaknesses. And some competitors have certain weaknesses. You have a competitor like Yanya who doesn't really have a weakness. Like she can do well on slabs. She can do well on coordination. She's also really, really strong, so she can do pure power. But I think that for some competitors, they just have specific weaknesses. Like, like Adamandra is like worse at the paddling and coordination sort of things. He just like didn't grow up jumping in the gym like some kids now.
Oh, so you've had a chance to try some of these problems too, like at various competitions. Like, how hard are they? Like, what kind of like the setting at how difficult is the stuff that's being set for these climbers? Obviously, it's complex, but yeah.
I was gonna say. I don't really know, but I've heard competitors say that it's not the hardest grades, so it's not like crazy difficult. Say like V10ish, let's say, for many of the grades, which for some of these competitors are, that's kind of easy, really. Compared to their actual physical limits. But the challenge is that the problems are often very complex with very tricky moves that they haven't necessarily done before. So they have to problem solve it, figure out how to do it, and then execute it. And they only have 5 minutes to do it. And the problem, you get fatigued, obviously, as you do the different problems back to back. And so, I don't know, it's not so much, they are very hard. And some of the pure power problems especially can be really high grades. But I think in general, the slabs are probably not that hard physically. It's like, in a way, the setting is designed to differentiate between the competitors, and it's not, the problems aren't designed to be the hardest thing that anybody can possibly do. They're just designed to separate the field out. So to isolate specific skills, to isolate the problem solving component, to draw differences between the competitors.
And to be entertaining, right? Which is like this other aspect that, especially in the Olympics, it's entertainment. It's a spectacle. And I always, I think Fitz, you and I were talking about this yesterday. I always think it's interesting with route setting, how it's such a unique thing, let's say like route setting for the Olympics, because you have to establish a field of play and you have the whole handholds and footholds. So you have these like obstructions that you can put on the wall to do that, or field of play to create with those. And yet you also have to make it visually appealing Everything in terms of shape, in terms of color, in terms of movement, all of that plays into it. And it's kind of like fits what you and I were talking about. It's like, think about track and field, like with hurdles. Okay, like somebody just goes and they put hurdles on the track and they put them in the same place every time, and like the runners just jump over the hurdles and that's it. There's no visual component, entertainment component that plays into it. And it's like, imagine if track and field, you had to have like, okay, you have to create the field to play with the hurdles, but it also has to look really cool, and you want the movement to look really cool. And I don't know.
It would start to look like a Mario Kart course where it's like rainbow hurdles at like different intervals and like weird patches of color all over the place. And you're like, whoa, trippy.
This one explodes. Yeah.
It's like, look how fast they're running. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This one, if you hit it, it blows up.
Flaming hurdle and all this. So it does put the route setters in a very unique spot where they have to take all of this into account, and also just varying degrees of ability of the competitors. I mean, all the Olympians are pretty close. They're all really, really elite, but you do want to separate them out somehow, and you want it to be fun and compelling and all of that. So
do you think setters care more about the aesthetic of a problem as to how it looks versus the aesthetic of how competitors climb on it? Because obviously they think about both, like the moves have to be cool, but just setting a problem that looks pretty with, say monochrome holds or whatever, like where it visually like looks nice, or it's like pops of color, like little jibs screwed onto giant volumes or whatever, it's like you can make it look cool. Do you think, particularly for the Olympics, when you know that your work is going to be on primetime television all over the world, like how much do you think the setters are thinking about visual aesthetics versus movement aesthetics? If you had to guess, we're just purely speculating here because we don't know anything about this, but I just think it's interesting because it's like setting cool moves is one thing, but you also just want it to look cool, even when there's not a climber on it.
I'm sure that the route setters are thinking visually, kind of entertainment, and also the separation. That has to be a consideration, right? How could it not be? You know that you're going to be...
Yeah, of course.
You know that this is going to be viewed by millions of people. And you think back to Tokyo, I can picture in my head some of those boulders that were just from a visual standpoint. The boulders at Tokyo, if people remember, especially in like the women's final, ended up being way overcooked. They didn't do an adequate job of separating the field, but they sure looked really cool. They really looked good.
What do you mean by overcooked? Because that's a World Cup terminology that I sort of recently learned, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, like overcooked versus undercooked. But what does that mean for competition?
Yeah, so overcooked, undercooked, that just means like too hard or too easy. I don't like to say easy because it's like it would be hard for me no matter what. But so like in the Tokyo Olympics, in the women's final, I think Yanya topped 2 of the boulders. Nobody else topped anything. I think Brooke had a zone, and that was it. And so other than that, other than Yanya's, there were no tops. So the boulders were way too stiff. And so we would say like they're overcooked. Or the alternative is if everybody had topped them, right? Like tops, you would say they're undercooked.
We'll be back with more after the break. Climbing Gold is brought to you by The North Face. I've been a North Face athlete for almost 18 years, and this summer you can join me and The North Face for a celebration of climbing, culture, and community at CLIM Fest. We're sending it big in the Big Apple at the Brooklyn Bridge Park on August 23rd and 24th. Watch her compete in an epic competition that sees athletes race to the top of a 55-foot wall over the water. On the ground, we've got DJ sets, food, exclusive merch, freestanding boulders to climb, and panel discussions led by my fellow North Face athletes and me. Whether you're happiest on the wall or the ground, don't miss the climbing event of the summer. Visit www.thenorthface.com and check out their events section for more info. Or check out our show notes for the link. Hope to see you there. Element is a zero-sugar electrolyte drink mix formulated with a science-backed ratio of sodium to potassium to magnesium. Each packet delivers a meaningful dose of electrolytes free of sugar, artificial colors, or other dodgy ingredients. It tastes great, and I've used it extensively on expeditions. And my 2-year-old loves it and calls it sprinkle water. Element is formulated for anyone looking to restore health through hydration, and is perfectly suited for athletes, folks who are fasting, or those who follow keto, low-carb, whole food, or paleo diets. Try Element totally risk-free. If you don't like it, they'll refund your order, no questions asked. Get your free sample pack with any Element purchase at drinkelement.com/climbinggold. Be sure to try the new Element Sparkling, a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water. That's drinklmnt.com/climbinggold. I first found Coros when I was looking for a GPS watch that could track my biggest outdoor adventures. I needed something with a massive battery life that was also robust enough to handle the climbing. As it turns out, Coros is the only GPS watch brand that has done some serious development for climbers, from multi-pitch GPS tracking to indoor programmed workouts. The watches have a mind-blowing battery life. The Vertex watch series lasts for more than 100 hours in GPS activities, so I only need to charge it once every several weeks. I only need to charge my watch so sporadically that I can never find the charger, because I haven't used it in 6 weeks. If you're interested in bringing new technology into your climbing training and tracking, you should consider their new Vertex 2S. Go to Coros.com and use the code CLIMBINGGOLD to secure a free watch carabiner with the purchase of your new Vertex 2S. The link's in the show notes.
What do you think that the Olympics impacts are going to be or are currently on outdoor climbing? Like, one of the things that I've noticed and I kind of think about is that people have been live streaming their actual outdoor climbs. Like Jakob Schubert live streamed big. Like, there's actually, like, he brought in, there's like multiple angles, like multiple camera angles of this happening, and it's like produced and beamed out from, the Flatinger Cave to YouTube, and people are tuning in. And I'm curious whether the idea, like that spectacle of the Olympics, is starting to maybe infiltrate some of the outdoor climbing, where it's like, oh, if people will watch it in this setting, why couldn't they watch it live outdoors? And I'm curious, like, that's one way I think maybe that this is impacting the outdoor climbing, or the Olympics are impacting the outdoor climbing. But like, what are the other ways, or is that, I don't know if you guys even buy that.
We've talked about the parkour influence and the rise of the coordination moves, and which kind of all comes from the prevalence of volumes, right? Just more volumes on the routes on the wall means you have more surface area to launch from and to grab onto. That's really, I think, what has led to this parkour evolution for bouldering, and now we're seeing it in lead climbing as well on the circuit. I can't help but wonder if eventually there's going to be some sort of evolution where you start to see more of the coordination parkour style on outdoor routes. And it's hard for us to even maybe like conceive of it, because we're like, whoa, that would be like really, wouldn't that be really dangerous? And how would you do like crash pad landings and stuff? But that's just because it's always hard to kind of visualize the future, right? Like it's of course we can't conceive of it because it hasn't, like, somebody hasn't been the innovator yet. But I just think you have now this whole generation, the competitors who are 16 years old, like, Serato Onraku, right? Olympian, 17 years old. And you have 18-year-old, 19-year-old. Like, at some point when they go outside, the only thing they know, the only style they know is this coordination style. That's because they've grown up with it. Like, we all kind of remember when there was this transition from like the crimp haul to the more dynamic coordination stuff on the circuit. But those people, the younger people, they don't know that transition. They've grown up with this coordination and dynamism being what it means to be a boulderer. And so when they take that outside, what the heck is that going to look like? Like, when this Olympic generation starts crushing outdoors in that newfangled way, I think it's going to blow our minds. I think it's hard to even imagine, but I think we're just going to see that parkour coordination paddle dyno style on outdoor routes, outdoor boulders, like we've never seen before, which is really cool. And it's also hard, like I said, it's hard to conceive of it, but...
Yeah, do you guys remember how incredibly innovative the route 3 degrees of separation felt when Chris Sharma first did the first ascent in whatever, like early 2000s? Because when Chris did 3 degrees of separation, it seemed so crazy that he was flying between the holds. And you're like, this is incredible. And now that route, I mean, not that it gets done that much, but people do climb it. And I don't want to say it's mundane, but you're kind of like, oh, you just jump to the jug? Like, everybody jumps to a jug nowadays. Like, is that even hard? You know what I mean? It's interesting because it kind of shows how quickly standards have changed, because that's just like a normal dyno now. You're like, oh, people do that kind of thing. That's not too crazy.
Yeah. We'll dive into speed climbing deeper in the season, but really quickly, like, let's just run through that. Speed, it's pretty cool in terms of this. A lot of the competitors in Tokyo that are quite good in speed didn't qualify because they weren't good at bouldering or lead climbing. And so there's a chance for, like, I don't know, to see some other great athletes who are less well known. Talk to us about speed climbing. What can we expect?
I think the only takeaway that people need for speed climbing is that it's the fastest Olympic sport. If you're going to remember one thing about speed climbing, walk away from it being like, it's the fastest sport in the Olympics, and speed climbers are awesome.
Yeah. How fast are they going? I mean, because there's a lot of fast things in the Olympics.
Well, I guess maybe the shooting sports are kind of faster. It depends how you, but if you think of the, like Usain Bolt being the world's fastest man with like 9-second 100-meter sprint, the climbing World Cup speed times are, the world record's 4.8 right now. And it seems like not unrealistic that people will push down towards 4.5 over the next season. Maybe not in Paris, but certainly over the next year too. And so I mean, that's basically twice as fast as the current fastest sport in the Olympics. So you're like, that's pretty freaking fast. And also, I mean, everybody hates on speed climbing all the time, but you're like, man, visually, it's so cool. It's like, it's what people think of as fast climbing. It's like when you watch someone speed climb, particularly at sort of world record pace, it's so impressive. You're like, God, that's fast.
A little kid who knows nothing about climbing, he sees speed climbing, he or she knows the winner, right? It's just whoever gets to the top first wins. It's the same logic as like just a running race or a swimming race. So in that sense, it's really great for just getting people that know nothing about climbing invested and interested in this at the Olympics, because there's kind of like no learning curve to understand the scoring of speed climbing.
Yeah, it's interesting because in a way, the times are sort of incidental to the actual speed climbing performance. Even though, I mean, I think we're probably likely to see a world record fall in Paris, but that'll sort of be secondary to whoever sets that record just trying to get to the top ahead of the person next to them, because it's a dual format, it's head to head. And so really, as long as you get to the top before the person next to you, then you're golden. But, I suspect that we'll see some record times as well, because when people go, full tilt, they go fast. But
do you think we're more likely to see a women's world record, new women's world record, or a new men's world record, or both at the Olympics?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that much about it. If I had to guess, I would not be surprised if there's a new men's world record. On the women's side, I don't know if there are quite as many competitors who are just poised to set a record. I mean, obviously there's Alexander Miroslav, who's held the record and pushed the record a bunch. But in some ways, I feel, I don't know. Yeah, maybe she'll beat her own record. It's funny interviewing some of the speed competitors on the U.S. team, though. It seemed like she's kind of Alexander Miroslav has kind of stuck to the OG beta, like the way she's always done the speed route. And I just can't help but feel like that's limited. And so it's like she can't go that much faster using the same beta that she's used forever. It's like at a certain point you have to innovate and like do some of the new strategies to go faster.
Yeah, she's also been the queen of the speed discipline for like she was undefeated from like the 2019 season to almost the end of 2023. She never lost. Now, she didn't do every competition. She was kind of choosy, but nonetheless, like that's incredible for a sprint discipline to be that dominant. And so you just have to look at that alone and say, wow, it's just like unlikely that she can continue being on the throne in a discipline in speed climbing where there's just so much variability. It's just the slightest stumble, the slightest little hitch can be the difference, and somebody else can win. And there are, like, Emma Hunt is chipping away, getting closer and closer. I think Emma's PR is like 6'3", or at least her competition PR, which is also the American and Pan Am record, is 6'3", and Miroslav's world record is 6'2", 6'2", So it's really close.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's maybe been a little bit less innovation on the women's side of speed over the last several years, or maybe a little bit less of the beta change. Because it seems like on the men's side, there are a lot of, there are different betas, there are different approaches. Like basically, records have been dropping quickly on the men's side, and men are climbing the speed route differently than they were even a few years ago. And it seems like that's maybe been a little bit slower to catch up on the women's side, even though, all the same beta applies and people can climb the speed route any which way. But I kind of wonder if the women's side of speed is poised for the same rapid improvement in a way, because all that beta is available. They can just, they can do all the things that the men are working on right now. And in theory, you would see rapid drops in the time as well. Do you think that's a thing, or what do you think?
Yeah, I do think that's a thing. I think that's accurate. I do think we're going to see kind of if you could make a case that the past few years have kind of been this sort of golden age of men's speed climbing, I think maybe we're just like kind of just starting now, the golden age of women's speed climbing. I think you're seeing more of them start to tweak their beta a little bit. Like I think Piper Kelly she's started doing like the Tomoa skip, a different method of starting. And I know that some of the women are playing around with the top beta, the upper section where there's that big dyno to the end. So I think the times will drop in the women's, and even more so than breaking a world record. The kind of one of the ancillary things that I'm curious to see in the Paris Olympics is not just do we see a new women's world record, somebody break Miroslav's 6.24, but also it's like, could a woman get 6 flat or sub 6, like 5 point something? That would be pretty darn exciting. And I don't think, with how many of them are just kind of tweaking their beta and the times are coming down pretty rapidly, I don't think that that's out of the question. And that'd be awesome. That'd be so exciting if somebody goes sub 6.
I'd be surprised about that in Paris maybe. But obviously over the next year, that's almost a guarantee. But, that's happening. And one random thing that I think is sort of interesting, and I kept having this issue while we were interviewing the different competitors, is that it's weird to apply gender to the beta in a way, because it's like, the men's beta versus the women's beta. But really, it's the same route. It's the same beta. It's just a matter of which competitors are choosing to use certain sequences for certain sections of the route. And really, that just comes down to the height of the individual competitor and the relative strength of that competitor, like whether or not they can do a one arm, whether or not they can jump in a perfect line. And so, we often talk about the men's beta, the women's beta, but it's like, really, that's not the way to think about it. It's just like, are you tall enough or strong enough to do the most efficient line up the route? And so I think that, we're going to continue to see rapid improvement, probably on both sides for the next couple of seasons.
Alex and Lisi, you guys live in Vegas. It's arguably the betting capital of the world. I've been sort of obsessing about this, not because I have ever sports gambled or whatever you call it, but I feel like that the moment we know our sport has truly arrived is when you could go into a Vegas sports book and bet on it. And I've been like kind of seeing if it'll, like, I've been trying to figure out online gambling and see if it's happening, right now, like whether you could do it. I don't know if it'll like crop up, but yeah. Is there a world where you guys see people being able to bet on comp climbing the same way they do
horses
on other sports? Yeah, on horses. Yeah.
They both wear harnesses. It's basically the same thing.
I don't know. I think right now it still feels a little far-fetched, but I mean, people will bet on anything, so it could happen. Maybe we should start a betting pool, Alex.
I feel like if anybody was going to bet on competitions, it would have been John. He'd already be doing it. So is this a thing? Like, do people bet on comps?
You've uncovered how I finance my lavish lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly.
The funny thing is, if there ends up being like betting lines for climbing in the Olympics, I wonder like who's setting those, like the over under, like who's making those picks, because somebody has to set all that. I mean, I'm not a gambler. It's like a world that's pretty unfamiliar to me, but I know that,
dude, this actually could be how you make your living, is setting the odds for that kind of thing. You could be the guy that's like, well, she did well at the last comp, but she has a little bit of finger injury and her knee's been bothering her. I'm going to give her 3-1 that she doesn't beat whoever on this. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, well, that's who I want to meet, that guy or girl, whoever's putting that together. I want to meet the odds maker for climbing in the Olympics, because
I think that's you. You should be the odds maker. This is you got to blow up this industry.
Climbing is a pretty close-knit, relatively small community when you think about it compared to other sports. And so I guarantee that any climber is only 1 or 2 degrees separated from whoever would be making those odds. And So it's either going to be a climber or it's going to be somebody that's not a climber that's totally unfamiliar with climbing and is just like, oh, Adam Andre? Yeah, I think that's a name I've Googled before. And like, okay, let's put him as the favorite. How are they going to set the odds? We were talking about Yanya, how she hasn't done a ton of World Cups over the past few seasons. So you would, if this odds maker's like looking at participation, he might be like, oh, Yanya, I don't know. She doesn't really do a lot of events. So put her low in the odds.
Though none of us know anything about sports betting, but does somebody actually set the odds? Because you could also just crowdsource that kind of stuff, can't you? Where it just comes down to what people are willing to put money on. Because isn't some betting done like that where, if a lot of people want to bet against somebody or bet for somebody else, the odds kind of create themselves depending on where the demand is. It's like market-based odds.
They will, like, what happens is that somebody does set the odds like in the beginning or sets the line for something. And then if there's so much money coming one way, they'll be like, maybe we didn't set this correctly. And it's a form of hedge for them too, because they're like, oh crap, if we lose, we're going to lose too much money. But they also sort of view that, I think, as something where they're like, maybe we miscalculated what we thought and we were like overzealous or underzealous on a pick. So they will shift if they see a bunch of money heading one way, they'll shift back.
Honestly, Climbing Gold would be a good name for a sports betting company as well. So we could all just sort of kind of pivot here. We could, if we want to actually make some money off this whole project, we can like just take a hard turn.
I like it.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more after the break. Whether at the crag, the recording studio, or van lifing, the team here at Climbing Gold always wants a great cup of coffee. Aeropress just introduced a complete travel system that was designed for life on the go. The Aeropress Go Plus still combines the best qualities of a few brewing methods you'd expect, and includes a customized tumbler for sipping your coffee that then doubles as a storage container. There's even a built-in filter holder to store your paper or metal filters. It's a compact and durable little package that makes reliably delicious coffee. And we can offer our audience an incredible deal on the Go Plus. Visit aeropress.com/climbinggold. That's aeropress.com/climbinggold and use the promo code climbinggold to save 20% off your order. It's time to say goodbye to crappy coffee and say yes to adventures fueled by better coffee. Thanks, Aeropress, for sponsoring the show. Dr. Squatch crafts natural, high-performance personal care products with no harmful ingredients. I don't shower often, but when I do, I use Dr. Squatch. I especially like the Wood Barrel Bourbon Bar Soap. From soap to shampoo to conditioner, they help me look, feel, and smell my best for whatever adventure I choose. They're offering new customers 20% off any purchase with the code ClimbingGold. Or you can go to drsquatch.com/climbinggold. The link's in the show notes. Dr. Squatch. Get dirty, stay clean.
We've said that the majority of the world's best climbers are showing up for this competition. But that's not totally true because one team is just so stacked that they capped out the number of athletes that they could send to the bouldering and lead competition. And realistically, it seemed like they could have sent 3 or 4 more people if there weren't a limit. And that team is Japan. Over the last few months, we asked a bunch of the competitors and coaches and people involved in the sport what makes Team Japan so dominant. And here's what they had to say.
What's the deal with Team Japan?
What about them? They're like really good.
I have a theory, but it's probably wrong.
Man, I think they're
I mean, you tell me. I mean, they got the secret sauce, clearly. It is working.
They just have the stickiest hands for like fiberglass and I'm serious. They're just so sticky.
So, I mean, my theory is based on the gym system there, especially a city like Tokyo. It's packed in. So you get really low ceiling boulder places. And so you have to come up with bizarre combinations and it makes you savagely strong. And I think there's an element of that with the Japanese gym system is that it's just hard. You go to the gyms there and it's brutal.
I think also the style and like the setting is pretty different than the US. It's very high quality at all the gyms that you go to. They don't have a V0 jug hall anywhere, So the level is just so high to begin with.
The idea that like they're all just like in a smaller country and have like this amazing talent that you like walk in and you see 10 guys like climbing V15, V16 equivalent of like comp style.
Their sessions also are sometimes like 6 hours long on like on comp boulders. You know, they do, some of them do 1 day on, 1 day off, and they just like go to work for 1 full day. Yeah, they're like pulling an 8-hour shift.
So they would literally like spend 3-4 hours trying like one dyno all over again until they finally do it. Like nobody really does that in Europe.
They're just like sessioning and goofing off and having fun, but they're trying things at such a high level that it's strictly indicative to what happens at the competition level, like the World Cup level of climbing, which is why they're constantly pumping out like new World Cup winning athletes, like clockwork.
I've looked into this before. I actually wrote an article for Gym Climber about it a couple years ago, and I interviewed Takako Hoshi, who was the assistant coach of Team Japan at the time. And yeah, you're not gonna find any singular magic answer. But some of the things that I remember Takako told me, one, there's just so many gyms in Japan. I mean, it's such a small country. I think it's like the size of California, give or take, and yet.
Except with double or triple the population.
Yeah.
So it's like, and that's also part of it because you have like high population density, tons of gyms, and like lots of people doing it.
Yeah. I mean, the estimate was, it's not like a confirmed number or anything, but the estimate I got was that there were about 400 gyms, climbing gyms in Japan. This is for like the lead up to the Tokyo Olympics. But compare that to, for instance, now in the entire United States, there 600 something, like 620, something like that. 622, I think, is the number at the end of last year. So just the concentration, I think I even crunched the numbers and I said, okay, well, if you took that concentration of gyms from Japan and put it in the United States, there would be like 13,000 climbing gyms or something. Like, it was a crazy number. So there's just like
the one thing when we compare like that, you kind of have to compare by square footage because the gyms in Japan are so small and a lot of them are like urban, you know, they're more like a home garage than they are what we consider a commercial climbing gym. And so, I mean, you're totally correct in that the density of gyms matters, but I think when you start to compare like that, it doesn't totally do justice to how much bigger gyms are in the US and how many more climbers they can serve.
But I think that adds to it though, because those gyms in Japan, I was thinking about this. They're much smaller, and if anybody's ever been to Japan, climbed in Japan, they're just a lot of times they're like in shopping centers, they're in shopping malls. Like it'll just be like here's a food store, here's a clothing store, and here's a climbing gym, like right next to each other. So they're very small. So it's kind of impossible to go into a climbing gym in Japan and just like climb by yourself. Like culturally and also just logistically, because it's so small, that's not really a thing. It's certainly not as common as it is in the States, where you can go to a gym, a big cavernous large gym, and just session by yourself. And I think that communal aspect expedites, in some cases, improvement. Because if you think about climbing in a group, you have other people there to get you psyched, to get you stoked, to push you to try harder, especially if you're not the best climber in the group. Like there's going to be somebody else in the group raising the bar for you. And I don't know where that fits into the equation, but I do think it counts for something, right? Because if you think about, like I compare it to track and field, any runner, if they want to set a personal best time on the track, they're never going to do that by themselves, just running alone on the track. You always need to run with a group of people to push you, to get the adrenaline pumping, the competitive juices, all of that. That's how you set your best. It's when you're kind of being pushed by others. And I think the smallness of the Japan gyms kind of adds to that, because you're always part of a group. You can't really be as easily isolated in the gym like you can here in the States.
Okay, so last time we talked about the Olympics, one of the things we focused on was the fact that in a lot of ways the US was behind. 5 years ago, we weren't supporting our athletes with travel, hotels, coaching, etc. USA Climbing seems to have ramped up a bit. The training center in Salt Lake has become a hub for athletes, not just for people living in the States, but for visiting athletes who come and train. And the U.S. has surpassed expectations in Tokyo. Nathaniel Coleman won silver. Brooke was a slip away from making the podium, and Colin Duffy false started and DQ'd in speed, but posted the fastest time in the competition. Has the U.S. caught up to Europe, or?
The real question is, has the U.S. caught up to Japan?
Yeah.
But I think, maybe it's not really a question of has the U.S. caught up with anybody in particular, but I think that the U.S. has definitely matured into a competition powerhouse. And I think the U.S. can now hold its own on the international stage in competitions. I mean, we fielded a full team of combined climbers and speed climbers. So we've got 8 competitors going to the Olympics. So I mean, that right there kind of shows the depth of talent that USA Climbing has helped develop.
And I think it'll come out when we start talking about our predictions. I think there's a really strong case that the Americans could do really well in this Olympics. And I think you'd have a hard time. It's funny you said, like the real question is Team Japan. I think you'd have a really hard time saying that arguing that the U.S. has not caught up to Europe in terms of like comp results, competitors aligning and all of that.
I mean, Team USA probably still get totally spanked by Team Japan, but at least we're fully competing now, because I feel like 10 years ago, the U.S. competitive team was a bit of I don't want to say it's a joke, because the competitors still took it seriously. They still tried their best. But I remember, not that many years ago, anytime I scrolled through comp results, if I saw USA, I'd be like, wow, someone in the USA got 17th. Like, that's cool. And now it's pretty routine to see, sometimes more than one American in the finals. We're like, oh, top 6, top 8, like several people from the US. Like, that's not uncommon. So I think it's fair to say that the US competition scene has really blossomed.
All right, since we're starting our own Climbing Gold betting organization, who you guys gonna pick to win?
Yeah, Yanya obviously for women, and then I'd maybe go Natalia for second if I had to choose, or as a potential first. I don't know. I feel like if Natalia had a great day, maybe she could win. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe Brooke. I don't know. Actually, I'll just go Yanya.
Yeah, I had to do some predictions for Climbing Magazine, and I chose Yanya for gold. I think I said Natalia for silver and Brooke for bronze, but I could easily see a situation where that's reversed and maybe Brooke is ahead of Natalia. But I do think I'm in agreement, Yanya, for the women's combined gold.
What do we think for men?
The question is, in my head, it's a question of experience versus youth and which one's going to come out on top. I think the two that kind of come to mind for me is like Jakob or Serato. And I think...
You think Jakob could win the Olympics?
I think he could, because he has a way of showing up for big events. Like, he has so much world championship experience, and I think that's where the younger generation might, I don't know, but they might, that might be kind of their Achilles heel, because it's like, yeah, you've had pressure for World Cups, you've felt the pressure for World Championships, but I think for a 17-year-old or something like that, the pressure of the Olympics could just be something that they just aren't ready for. I mean, it's so magnified.
That kind of speculation is interesting, though, because you could also flip it the other way, where a 17-year-old just doesn't care and has no expectations, whereas a 30-year-old that has a career and sponsors and potentially a family and all that kind of stuff feels a way heavier burden of responsibility and expectation and whatever else. So, I mean, I think that those kinds of things, it's hard to speculate with that, because it's like it really could go either way. It just depends on what the competitor is bringing to it.
I think I'm going to go youth on this one.
Yeah, and I would go youth as well.
I'll pick Colin Duffy. I think that we haven't really seen him. I mean, he qualified at World Champions a year ago. We haven't really seen him climb, except for like snippets on Instagram. And I don't know. He was surprising in Tokyo, and he's gone through that once, without having like crazy, like those sort of burdens of like there. And he's just, I don't know. You look at it and I'm like, I'll pick Colin Duffy on the men's side. Way
to stick to Team USA.
I know. I don't know. I was like, whatever. Who knows? It's so hard.
Well, that's the thing is I'm like, yeah, it could happen.
Yeah.
I think on the men's side, I would give even odds to half the competitors, like depending on the day and depending on the setting and just how things go. I think that anyone has a pretty good shot.
Yeah. It is really incredible. There are like 8 people that probably have like a legit chance at winning gold.
All right, my speed prediction, I'm going Sam Watson just because he holds the current world record, and also he sounds very confident in interviewing him. He was just kind of like, I'm ready to win. I was like, okay, well, power to you. Let's see what happens. Certainly rooting for him, just because, it's like freaking could be American hero. You know, I mean, as I told him, he'd be on the Wheaties box or something if he's the world's fastest Olympian and he sets a world record while winning gold. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That's a great story, and I'd love to see it come together. But of course, it's speed, so anybody could false start or slip or whatever, and you know there's some variability. But he has been very consistent in sub 5 times, so we'll see. But what about the women's side?
I think Miroslav. I think it's just hard. I think it's hard to like not look at that track record and say to yourself, you know, it's interesting because she's kept that original beta, like as you pointed out, but and the other competitors are evolving, but I just think there's something about the length of her career and the amount of time she's had with that route and just the results that she's had. It's hard not to think that that's the favorite.
I kind of agree. I if it was 6 months until Paris, then I maybe would disagree because I feel like other people would overtake her. Or if it was next year, then I'm like, I just don't think she's going to hold on for much longer. But I think for holding on another month or two, I'm like, I kind of think she might. It's like, I think she might be able to win Paris, but I guarantee she won't win in LA in 28. You know, it's like I think that her method is just not the way.
I think Emma will do it. I think Emma Hunt will win. I think Miroslav will have a good performance. I think she'll get on the podium, but my prediction would be gold medal for Emma.
Is that because you're rooting Team USA, or you actually think Emma's going to peak at the right time and sort of pull past?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to be totally objective about it. I just think looking at Emma's time, her Pan Am record is so close to Miroslav. I think it's kind of a coin flip between the two of them. And I don't know. I'd like to think that national bias is not part of the equation. I just think Emma has looked really, really performatively good these last couple World Cup seasons, getting better and better and better. And like I said, like longevity in speed climbing is it's
tough,
really, really rare. Yeah. And Miroslav's already had the longevity for years. So I think we're kind of overdue for a changing of the guard.
Yeah, I feel the same way that we're overdue for changing the guard. I just wonder if Paris will be where the guard changes or if it'll come right after. But either way, I think the same point holds that things will be changing very quickly. Yeah, I'd like to see no injuries, no illness, and just pure performance. Like I hope that everybody is peaking on the same day. You know, it's like I want to see everybody just freaking tear the holds off the wall, and then let the best climber win.
Hey everyone, just a quick note. If you're digging the show, please consider liking us on Spotify. You can give us some stars or writing a review on Apple Podcasts. It'll help us as the Olympics kick off. Climbing Gold is a production of Duct Tape and Beer. Alex Honnold is our host. Our production and editing team includes the talents of Lauren Delaney Miller, Marco Seiler Gonzalez, Evan Phillips, and John Bergman. Skylar Perwins is our YouTube and social media editor. Music today by Brendan O'Connell and Golden Finch. The tracks are courtesy of the artists or Track Club. Our creative director is me, Fitz Cahal. Our executive producers are Jonathan Retzik and Ben Endy for RxR Sports and Lacey Hendricks and Becca Call for Duct Tape and Beer. Thanks for listening.